Okay, let's take our seats and try to get going in about 1 minute. We have just about everybody back. So while we're waiting for the last couple of people to get to the table, let me point out what is in front of you. You should have 3 new items in front of you. One is a contact sheet of everybody here and their relevant contact information as corrected on the first day. Second is a yellow sheet, which is an evaluation form, which we urge you to fill out. That's why we gave you this Tervis tumbler for hot and cold beverages. I'm trying it out with my coffee. It's kind of an exchange. It's not really a gift. It's we give you the tumbler, you fill out the evaluation sheet. We do look at them. We do try to improve our conferences as a result of them. So since we are talking about feedback, we're not the government, but we are governing this meeting, and it would help a lot. Okay, with that said, let's move in with our third and final day. We have welcome to the diehards who are staying on the live stream for our third day, but this is the day we report back from working groups. And yesterday afternoon, we kind of revised our working activity. So we now have, I believe, 4 working groups. There may be a split off even for a 5. So I'm describing them as the first one honing in on something that was reported yesterday, a kind of Yelp feedback type scheme for government services and possibly government officials. B would be a passion-based is a way to foster passion-based engagement in governmental type activities. 3 would be an entrepreneurship and open data for government employees. I may be mischaracterizing these, but 4 we've described as odious, which is the ODI in the United States. I'm sorry, but you just can't resist that, really. And then if we have another report, we can pick that up at the very end. So I would suggest we move. Is there another one?
The internal change agent one, does that fit within
That was the intrapreneurship, I think. And we didn't like that word, so you're going to have an opportunity to change it when the. These are just place markers, so we know who's going in what order. And we're going to start with the Yelp feedback. I'm not sure who is going to report on that.
I think, go ahead. I got some slides. Yeah.
Okay. We'd like to, if you have slides, it would be good. Can you put them on? Philip, are you going to demo?
I can sort of report a little bit back to you.
Okay. This gives us a chance to have our couple more people fill in the seats. Thank you.
That's the top one.
Worst, 100 worst?
Yep.
Who would have thunk? You want to?
I can drive with this. Great.
Okay, great.
If I can get it in there.
I'll get it.
It should. You want to push that it might be upside down. Should fit in there.
Is it working?
So, our team sort of changed the idea behind Yelp for, sorry, used to just being loud. Our team changed the idea a bit. We really drilled down, I think, to the key question of this project. We wanted to test the key assumption of this project, which is, are local government services competitive? Well, certainly there's some evidence to that regard. For instance, the Partnership for Public Service runs this, the best places to work. It's a list of the best federal agencies to work for, and it's caused, I think, a lot of agency heads to try and figure out how to improve their sort of long-term HR strategy and made them a little bit more competitive. So there is some evidence in that regard. But the other big thing that was pointed out by Waldo was that this is already being done. It's already being done on Yelp. So, you know, you can go and look at Yelp reviews for the San Francisco Superior Court jury services, and people reviewing like, man, I really wish I wasn't going to jury duty here. I really wish I could go to jury duty somewhere else. You know, reviews of the White House. I think this one was done by Mark. In the end, the Obama administration is not afraid for whistleblowers. Anyway, I'm just kidding. This is anyhow. So this is a file explorer. And so the question is, so with this Yelp stuff already happening, it's not about making a place for people to post reviews. That's already being done, and it's going to be done more effectively than we're ever going to be able to do. So instead, the question becomes, how do we create competition? Because agencies can't see how well they're doing in the face of all of these different Yelp reviews. So our idea is to test this assumption by using the Yelp API to create a website called 100 Worst. And it's just going to list the 100 worst DMVs in America as rated on Yelp. And it can look something like this, or this is my presentation and my art skill. This is Katria's, where we could actually plot this stuff on a map and actually see, you know, where the 100 best are and where the 100 worst are for DMVs. And we can take this beyond the DMVs to city halls. What are the 100 best? What are the 100 worst city halls? What are the 100 best and 100 worst polling places in the United States? What are the 100 best and 100 worst unemployment offices in the United States? And what we can do is we can see, you know, what are the 100 best and 100 worst TSA checkpoints in the United States. What we can do is see whether or not this is good media chum. So whether or not local news outlets will report on whether or not these are good or bad DMVs, and sort of use this as almost a lead generation service for local media to report on this stuff. There is some evidence that shows that the news media will in fact report on this. Here's something from Reason.com that's asking people what are America's worst DMVs. We can use Yelp to find some of that data. We also want to measure our success. We've got some key metrics and measurements, but really what we want to see, what I think our reward is, look, if one DMV, you know, improves its service dramatically because it was rated the worst in the country, or if a set of a county elections boards drastically overhauls its polling place management because they were rated the worst in the country by the media, this solves a lot of problems. What's also interesting about this idea is that it's one of these open government ideas that can actually affect people who maybe are not, you know, on Yelp, or who are, you know, it can affect the poor. It can affect the people who are not directly involved in open government by leveraging media. So this is our team, and this is our idea for 100worst.org, which I think Phil is working on a prototype right now. I don't know if you have anything to show or not.
No, I actually, just out of curiosity, where did you get how did you generate that list? Was it made up?
Yeah, Katria made it up.
Okay. So, I mean, on a quick, I don't have any of this online yet, but on a quick sort of analysis, just for the top three and bottom three results were for Department of Motor Vehicles were a little bit surprising. Obviously, you have sample bias in terms of number of people who are reviewing here, but maybe I'll start with the most surprising, which was the top-rated DMV in the country was in Detroit. And if you actually read the reviews,
They're into cars there.
that's true. It's a good point. If you read the reviews, they are actually like very well reasoned. I assume there might have been something strange there, but it seems like they actually have a pretty good DMV there. The other sort of top two from there are Scottsdale, Arizona, and Arvada, Colorado. Bottom three, Chicago, Opelika, Florida, and Denver, Colorado. So there's already, I mean, I think part of what the point we're trying to make is there's already a lot of data we can work with, and it's sort of just about demonstrating how some of these tools and venues can sort of be repurposed and highlighted for this sort of purpose.
The other interesting thing is you can take the sort of 100 worst and mash them up with other data sets. So the 100, yeah, sure.
So, I think Tiago should talk about the mashup,
Okay.
perhaps, but there are definitely things that we can do to watch over the course of a year and see whether or not this is having any sort of effect. Some of the ones that we came up with are really basic, change in the number of reviews. If you see a newspaper article that says you can rate your government services on Yelp, we want to know if that changes the amount of ratings of government services. Changes in those ratings, on average, the number of responses from the worst 100 in America to people, trashing them on Yelp, basically. Social sharing and media mentions. Is Tiago here still? Too bad. So Tiago had this brilliant idea. We can track these metrics for the 100 best and worst, but we should really have a randomized control group of 200 cities that are not listed and track the same metrics for them. And it was something that he said his organization or perhaps the Omidyar Foundation would be interested in funding. Like that's useful research to see whether or not this kind of thing has an actual effect at the end of the day.
Yeah, the interesting thing is here from why we like this idea is because it's small, discrete, and it's achievable. It's not something that's going to require funding to do initially. It can inform a test to answer the real question, which is like, if you put this stuff out here, will government care? Which is something that Kathy brought up a lot, which is like, no one's going to care unless it has some sort of significant critical mass to it. But once it has some critical mass and it's starting to get media reporting and it's tied maybe to public officials, it can also, this idea of mashing up the 100 worst polling places with, say, low-income community data to see whether or not underserved, or the 100 worst libraries with broadband access. These are all things that can be done to, I think, really generate some other interesting stories from the press.
I think it's a terrific idea. As you said, it's doable. Get to who does it. I know that Philip has already started it. But, who does it? How does it become sustainable or institutionalized? Does it need to be in one place? But before that, I do have this question, which is a concern over, can you game it? First of all, I think cities will care because media will cover that. You have report cards or any kind of top this, top that, bottom. That's the kind of thing that media can really cover, and they do with schools certainly and other ratings already. So you have a rating system that will get covered. And elected politicians are certainly going to care, even if the public, and by the way, I think public officials would in any event, but certainly the elected officials would. But, so what would prevent, is there a way, you talked about mashing up other data, but
What prevents people from mailing bombs to each other via eBay, or what prevents people from like editing their own Wikipedia articles and making themselves? Some of these things just sort of work themselves out, and I think in this case, yes, could a DMV manager convince all of their employees to go in and give 5-star ratings and affect the result? Sure, but is that going to have a meaningful impact across the entire data set? I don't think so. And if it does, then we know, and that's the purpose of creating small tests.
I guess what my real question is there it makes sense to not only use Yelp, but is there some other way, some other data that you would mix in, or would it work better if it's just one database?
I have a quick comment on that. I have experience with Yelp in this regard. It's actually pretty hard to Yelp, and the reason is they're skeptical internally of reviewers who are new reviewers. And so if you haven't reviewed before and suddenly they see 20 brand new reviewers reviewing this DMV, their employees, they literally scrape them away. And so they're pretty good about preventing gaming
see.
of the system.
Okay. Okay. So, any other comments on this? Oh, so to my question of how does this happen? Who does what next?
Phil?
Well, I'm definitely committed to release a basic prototype, and Katria and I have both been working on some actual usable website product. So I think we can actually have a very basic prototype functioning later today. So from there, I'm not quite sure where, but happy to have that conversation.
I'm happy to push it to media.
So 24 hours is pretty good time of idea to prototype. I think that's a pretty good.
Ship.
Good. Okay, well, should we just move on then?
Are there any other questions or comments about the project?
What was the inappropriate name that you self-censored?
The worst fucking DMVs in America.
It was laid out beautifully at the top of the website.
That would get attention.
Can I ask one question?
Panthea Lee.
I'd be curious. Greg and I were having this conversation at dinner yesterday, and we were talking about sort of the ranking of government agencies sometimes, and I'm not sure what the process might be for involving agencies sort of in the development of this before, let's say, we rolled it out. But we were talking about sometimes different offices or officials don't necessarily have the same resources or capability, or are put in different conditions than comparable, for example, DMVs or libraries in different areas. And so sometimes putting just a ranking based on public perception that doesn't necessarily, or other indicators, without knowing what the conditions that they have to face, might end up alienating these individuals. And I think you were disagreeing with me or we had a good discussion around it, but
I think part of that is the point of this is to get local media to ask questions about why, right? So your library has a lot more money than my library. I'm pissed off that I have the worst library in America. My media organization should be asking the question, why do we have the worst library in America? And the answer to that should be because it's not getting nearly the level of public funding that your library is, and
right.
Therefore it is bad.
This isn't like a pillory, it's more of a public forum where you're calling out someone, but they have the opportunity to
Right.
respond with the reasons they're unable to do
Right.
better.
The one thing to that, though, is media is, you put out a list of 100 best and worst, and they're very, they like lists. They like talking about the worst, and then someone comes back with a reasoned response. These are all the reasons. That's less likely to get coverage.
I guess we'll see what happens.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, let's move to Waldo. Jaquith.
Anecdotally, when I have tried to check in on Yelp to government-related services, it's kind of hard. If you've ever had the experience of trying to check into a place in Yelp, and you're right there, and you're looking at the list, and it doesn't show up, and it's because they use a ranking-based system based on what already has the most reviews to figure out where you probably are. So 2 blocks from a stadium, you're not going to show up number 1, no matter where your GPS says you are. So because there are basically no existing ratings for government services, it's a challenge right now to be able to check into those. And I don't think Yelp really considers those part of their ecosystem. So I encourage you to reach out specifically to Luther Lowe. He's the Director of Public Policy. That's L-O-W-E at Yelp. Great guy, very accessible, prolific tweeter. And say, hey, this is a thing we're looking to do. I reached out to him when I was looking to put restaurant reviews, health inspections of restaurants on Yelp, and they created this whole system in response. Reach out to them, because I bet there might be some small tweaks that they can make that will make it much more accessible, so that when somebody's looking at Yelp, rather than just seeing the 6 closest burger joints that they see also the Social Security office that happens to be located nearby, and they think, oh, I did go there once and it sucked, and I'd like to write them up.
Part of the mock-up that Catria made had a call to action that was like, you should go and rate these things as well.
Okay, great, but I think, does it make sense to actually talk to Yelp?
For sure.
And go directly, and I think
We
it's
have a
great to have
prototype.
the actual person, that's terrific. Yes, Joel, and then Kathy Conrad.
So, one of the hypotheses you're testing is that government will care if you surface these kinds of ratings. Did you talk about what the feedback loop might be for on the government side? Like, how do we see that they are responding? Could that be something that you address in this application or on Yelp? Like, because that's what I would like to see. Like, if we can surface these kind of ratings, like, what's the response?
So, one thing was, look, what we're going to do is like run this once and then run it a year from now and see what changes in ratings are. And I think to Catria's point, we're also going to, sort of test the movement there versus unlisted cities, the cities in the middle or departments in the middle, to see like whether there's sort of anomalous changes based on. So we tested against cities that weren't affected by the listing. But I think there's lots of other metrics that I think. I mean, we were very metric heavy. Catria went through a list, but I think that part of a lot of this is, look, we just need to test some assumptions, and because it costs nothing to make and to do. We can, and it's so little risk, we can learn a lot just by doing it and seeing. I mean, the other thing, the media mentions, and can we track? Can we reward the places that improve? And the idea, the other thing to think about, because I guess this is a big lesson learned, at least for me in this group, is that there's been a lot of discussion for years in this community about Yelp for government. This isn't a new idea. It's a very, very old idea.
Yeah.
And I think what we came down to in the group is like, we don't really actually want a Yelp for government. We want a TripAdvisor for government. Because what TripAdvisor does is it says, like, this is the best place to go, and this is the worst place to go. And that kind of thing is going to create the incentive for governments to change. Not just like allowing people yet another forum to complain that doesn't affect any change.
I can see the story where the local entity goes from the worst 100 to the best 100. And in terms of motivation, that's going to be, the fabulous story, the worst to best. Kathy?
Yeah, and I was build on, or had a similar point to Clay's, to keep in mind that the intent of this isn't just to reveal people's opinions, but rather to drive service improvements. And so as you look at the different kinds of services that could lend itself to this kind of a site over time, people don't now go to Yelp to find reviews of government services. So I think the purpose of it isn't so much the reviews themselves, but the list that result from them. But in order for that to be successful, we've got to drive more people to contribute reviews. So I think the other thing we talked about is trying to make Yelp, trying to encourage Yelp to make it easier for people and more common for people to write reviews of these kinds of services. Because when you search on Yelp right now for things, like government services, you get a whole bunch of crazy results, some of which are restaurants that serve American food.
Okay.
So there's some work that needs to be done in the ecosystem to populate Yelp with the kind of meaningful reviews that will lead to the service improvements that we're seeking.
Very good. Alissa Black.
I just wanted to respond to Panthea's question about kind of outing governments, agencies. And it reminded me of when I worked for New York City's 311, and I was working, or Mayor's Office in 311, and I was working with the different departments to determine their service level. We were, for the first time, going to tell the public what to expect from government. And the Parks Department was so hesitant to tell people that their trees get pruned on a 10-year cycle. And we were like, well, why? I mean, if that's your policy, why don't you want to tell people that? That, like, sorry, you actually can't make that request of city government. We do this on a cycle, and that's all we can afford, and it's probably going to move to 15 to 20 years based on budgeting. But what we convinced them was that they should actually tell the public that, to one, set expectation, but two, that we should actually be collecting information about the number of people that want their trees pruned, so that they could use that to go to advocate for more budget. And so I guess what I was thinking is, if you show up as number 10 on the list, you actually don't want to work for a messed up department or agency. You might use that as a way to then advocate for budget improvements or service improvements that you've been asking for a really long time. And so I think it can actually empower government staffers rather than disempower them and kind of embarrass
Very
them.
good. Kelly Bourne.
So one thing that occurs to me, Kathy, and you were talking about, what is more useful, the reviews themselves or the list. Was that, as I understand it, one of the goals of this is to enable government to improve. And I think one of the challenges, I recall, Waldo, yesterday you read some comments, not the most constructive or profound comments, and I think that part of the success of this effort would hinge on people learning to engage with Yelp in a slightly different way. And so maybe, Katria, as you said you have a kind of call to action, and maybe within that it would be useful to have some parameters about the kinds of information that are going to be useful, because just a sheer worst versus best list in and of itself isn't going to force the kind of change that we want if the comments are of the quality that Waldo shared. Yes.
We talked yesterday about if there's even like a drop-down menu that gives people some suggested criteria like timeliness, efficiency, courtesy, not a lot, but 4 things that should be kept in mind.
So that is looking more like TripAdvisor, and
Yeah.
So you
So
can
that's-
rate. If you could do some ratings, internal ratings,
Along
basically.
different dimensions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Stefan Verhulst.
Yeah, I think it's a great ideation, and it's great because it's agile and it can be measured quickly. And I would suggest that you may actually develop the platform and see whether you can develop other services by looking at other review services. So, for instance, it would be interesting to see how can you use Glassdoor to, because if you look at Glassdoor, there's a lot of review of services by employees. And I think that would actually be interesting to also compare, what are the 100 best, 100 worst in the eyes of those who have worked there. And I think that would actually be an interesting additional service.
Okay. Okay, let's move on then to the next group, which is, I'm calling passion-based engagement in governmental type activities. What must be a better name for that? This is Frank, are you? Okay. Go ahead. If the third group has slides or something and want to send them over here, it might speed things up a little. I've got the ODI one. Is that? Is that you, John? Do you have those slides for the third one? Okay. Do you want to sit here, or do you want, we have a clicker that you can just sort of do?
Sure, we only have 4 slides.
Okay.
I can grab the clicker.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, I've got it, sorry. I will make you get it.
All right, so I will start things off. As we've talked quite a bit, there are a lot of challenges inside government. And in Pawnee, in our Parks and Rec department, we have a number of challenges. And one of the things that, we're really excited about this, the trail network that we have in the city, and we're implementing bike share, which is great. We're excited about having more opportunities for multimodal use of the trails in our parks. But we're a little bit worried about erosion. We're worried about the way that these different modes are going to interact on our trails, wondering what that's going to do to maintenance, things like that. And we don't know that we actually have that expertise in-house. We're not really sure what the best route to take is. And so at this point in time, we're kind of calling on people in our community to help us come up with answers to the questions that we have. So, Penn to the rescue. Mark?
So basically, we're able to throw up sort of the bat sign and call on the community. And what we're talking about, generally speaking, is tapping talent and experience in the community to co-create solutions to government challenges. What we know, what we all talked about, and what generated so much excitement in the group is the idea that everybody in the community is an expert on something. We all have life experience that makes us expert on some subject matter. And people are excited things that they know about, and very rarely, if ever, does government call on them to assist in solving government problems. This does two main things. Is it allows us to engage citizens, which is something we're all really interested in a really productive way in their government, and allows government to essentially leverage free services from the people who are going to be affected by whatever the government policies are. Structurally, and we're going to have Frank get into more of the details, but structurally there are three components to this program. It's a web-based platform that we're designing. We will design the prototype for municipalities. It's a replicating website, meaning that any city that or county that decides to opt in can simply sign up, become a member of the Penn network. They'll get their own custom website. They can change it for their city. And there are three primary components to the way this process works. One component is we will be designing an initial slate in consultation with municipal officials of categories where cities and counties might need help. And we have not designed that slate. We didn't have enough, we didn't feel we had enough inside government expertise to design that effectively at this point. But we'll have, say, 40 categories wherein cities or counties might need assistance from the community. We will then create, sitting next to that, categories of interest and expertise or experience that citizens have. So people can sign up and say, look, I've taught lots of kids how to read. I'm really excited about this. I'm an expert in teaching kids how to read. And I want to clarify, when I say expert, we mean something different than maybe what you normally think of when you hear expert. We're not talking about academics or professionals. They're included in the group of experts potentially, but it's just people who have life experience. Like I said, everybody's an expert. And then ultimately the third component is a group of funnels wherein we collect the people who are interested in being the intellectual capital for their municipality. There are a number of ways we can do this. This would be more developed in the marketing plan phase, but to give you some examples, we can have the local DMV have a form that is offered to everybody that comes to the DMV where they can check off the areas that they're interested in helping in. We talked about the idea of gas stations now run these videos. And when you're sitting there pumping gas, and we could talk about you can help your city or your county, and we can have that linked to a mobile app. You could have it anytime somebody goes to City Hall or to the county administration center for any kind of service, they can be offered the opportunity to participate. And then also tapping into existing networks in the communities, networks of retired people, networks of school teachers, and offering them the opportunity to volunteer their services within the Penn network. So that network would be an asset base for any local municipality, and then the vision is to tie those asset bases together nationally. Because it's possible that Philadelphia is looking for ideas in trail maintenance, and maybe they don't have anybody in their local base that has that expertise. They can reach out to other Penn networks around the country and look for people who might be willing to help a community next door to theirs or even in another state. So that's the basic framework of the Penn operation, and I'm going to let Frank get into more of the technical details.
So how does Pawnee get this great network activated? So this is a piece of software. This is there's ultimately a network of experienced citizens who are contributing back to government, but it's powered by a piece of software. We think this is something that would be offered as a service to cities. We would go to scale. We would work out the business plan later. And the software will help the city staff do something that right now sounds really hard, which is find these people, reach, get their feedback, be able to process it within a reasonable amount of time and be able to act on it. And so we'll build the workflow for effective use of citizen experience into the software. And so starting with the lists that Mark outlined, we will scaffold the tool to enable the busy Parks Department person to put out the Penn sign, pull in the network. And to be very specific, we mean things like you can send emails from the tool and get them rounded up in a report that you can then look at. If you want to set up a conference call, maybe the tool can set up your conference call line for you and give you the details and put it in everyone's calendar. So there's ways that what sounds like a very complex interaction can actually be made a lot simpler through the software. As well as offering the software, we want to offer training. So we think that this is a change in responsibility and engagement for a lot of city staff, and so we think there's a bundle here of a tool and also some assistance to work out how to plug it into your workflow. And I guess I want to add that we're engaging people pre-RFP, pre any sort of formal consultation. This is an informal way to engage this network of experienced people. This is not a way to further complicate your public engagement processes. So we looked at other volunteering tools. We will put them up in our report. The key sort of difference between PEN and the sort of existing networks of volunteers is that these people are not volunteers. This is not volunteering. This is a different model of interaction where you're bringing your experience to bear on a particular problem. So we explored, SCORE and RSVP, which are tools to bring senior citizens' skills onto particular projects. We looked at Match.com. We think that maybe there's something there, but we go on second dates. So we're interested in you bringing your citizen experience to help us flesh this out. And if you head to the bit.ly link, you'll find our in progress write-up on GitHub. Thanks.
Frank, could you briefly talk about, we talked about the LinkedIn API?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the challenges this sort of assembling the network presents is, how do you find people's skills? So how do you know what experience lurks in the community? And particularly, you can say, the Parks Department, but there's a lot of different activities that a Parks Department might need assistance with. And so we wonder whether one way to bootstrap the initial crowd of experienced citizens would be to build on the information that people already have up on LinkedIn, and to use the endorsements model where other people say what you're good at on LinkedIn, whether there's something there that we could either directly plug into LinkedIn and populate those skills into the experience network, or whether there's a sort of comparable model where you might be better at telling me the experience that I could bring to bear on the problems that the city has.
Let's go to Katria first.
I love the concept. I work tangentially in this field. We map volunteer skills and equipment, and we work with municipal governments, and we try to tell the municipal government that their lives will be easier if they would just use this massive database of. And the problem is, that sounds like I want you to do more work. So I think there's a significant challenge in explaining what that transaction is going to look like. They've never done this before. So I think you might have to guerrilla attack a couple well-networked communities and show success before you actually launch this nationwide. It's the only thing that's gotten us into hostile municipalities is success in municipalities that we held the hand of. I think knowing before you start making tools to schedule what the transaction looks like for both sides is important. So for example, if I'm a lawyer, I can't really legally give legal advice unless I'm being paid, because there's no client attorney confidentiality in place. There are going to be different skills and different things that can't be done in an informal, just let's chat about it. There are also municipalities that might just use this as a way to announce public meetings. So that's kind of disenfranchising for the person who was like, but I'm an expert, and so come sit and we'll talk at you, and then at the end we'll have some sugar cookies and punch. I think that's all my comments for now. I think try it without the tools in a community first.
So this is to Public Insight Network, which we talked about. The two areas where Public Insight Network had the hardest hill to climb was, and they had to go out and actually do a lot of training, to Katria's point. So they had to actually go into newsrooms and teach them how to do it. And it's usually like a 2-day thing. So I think there is a fairly high barrier to entry that you should take into consideration for it. The other thing is that when we did the research around PIN, what we saw is the places that were using it effectively had, again, a manager that, like in the morning news meeting, say, go, have you not used PIN for this? To get everyone to start using it. So it's really important to target someone at the upper echelon of whatever bureaucracy you're talking to on it to really engage with it. What's exciting about it, though, is what we found with PIN is if it was used correctly. For example, the New York Times used it for a story around autism, and they told us that the people that they got out of the PIN network were by far the best contacts that they had on it. So when it's used well, it's great. And I think I mentioned this in the small group, but the biggest frustration for the people that were in the network is when they were contacted about their expertise. So some reporters used it as, I'm just going to go talk to the public with this. So, I signed up as an architect and someone's calling me about, dog catching stuff. That's not cool. So I would say that's the other thing is, and that's what a lot of the training was, is to make sure that you're using it in the right way, and you're not just saying it's not an excuse or it's not an easy way to say I got public input because I talked to people with it. So just some caveats around that.
And that came up, your comment about people being contacted about the wrong things came up a lot in our discussions, and one of the ways that we designed in to filter that and prevent that from happening is if you say you're a Parks and Rec person, you're in that category, the initial contact with you on a problem is a base email that says, we have this problem in Parks and Recs, are you interested in helping? That way you go, well, that's great, they're contacting me about Parks and Recs, but I'm not a trail service, that's not for me. So people can look at it and go, that's great, they're contacting me, I'm actually being looked at, but that's not my area.
And I was on this team as well, and one of the things we talked about but didn't go too far into because we had some limited time, but was this idea of rating kind of the interactions that a staff member might have with an expert, so that over time you now have the people that aren't maybe disruptive or kind of the usual suspects that aren't having productive conversations or solutions, and then you could do it vice versa. You could also have people say, like, I was an expert with this city government and it was a horrible experience, and so that it's a kind of a both-way rating system.
Clay Johnson.
Predictably, well, the first thing I want to do is echo Katria's comment about the perception of adding extra work. When we were doing RFP-EZ inside of the White House, I mean, that's the thing that contracting officers hated the most, right? And so having a level of empathy for the government worker is a really important thing if you want a product to succeed. For us, even saying, like, look, we can save 30% on your IT budget. Your prices will come in 30% lower, contracting officer. The contracting officer will be like, I don't care, it's extra work for me. And when you're talking about 30% of an IT budget, of the federal IT budget, that's a chunk of change. So our sales pitch quickly became, we want to be able to shift you from doing low-value work to doing high-value work, the work that you signed up for, right? And that became a much more appealing sell to the government worker, to say, like, look, we don't want to create extra work for you. Using our software reduces the work that you hate. And yes, there will be some extra work, but it'll be work that you love. And the exchange is you're going to not have to do a whole bunch of data entry. And they got really excited about that. The other thing is, I'd like to see commerce baked into this. I mean, predictably, what I said yesterday was you should pay people. Today, I'm going to say again, you should pay people. Here's the deal. If you showed up to build a house for Habitat for Humanity, and there wasn't a paid carpenter, a paid electrician, and a paid plumber there, that house would fall on itself, and everyone in it would die, right? So what you want, there's not a debate between whether or not there should be experts and experts should be running government, or that volunteers and citizens should be running government. You need both. You need specialists. You need people. But the problem is that a carpenter doesn't want to donate their time for free because that's what they get paid for. And so baking some commerce into this and saying, like, look, if you need to use money in order to get expertise, you can. I think is a valuable thing to do. And again, the procurement regs for most cities and most local governments say that you can do that. So those are my comments.
Okay. Michelle Lee?
This is a really exciting concept, and I want to third Katria's comment about building the network, building the experience before we build the technology. I think over the past 2 years, what I've seen is we can draw a lot of attention through technical buzzwords like open data, SMS. You know, there's a lot we can do to draw media attention, and I think what the first group did so smartly was think about how this is going to be accepted into public dialogue, how it's going to draw attention, and I think there's a role for that. I think there's a need for that in this initiative also. Is, you know, how are you going to get people beyond Story and a couple others in government to want to call on this network, and how is it going to be appealing to them?
Okay, good. Kathy Conrad.
So we've done sort of a variation of this, not with citizens, but with government employees, to bring them into our innovation center to do what we're calling a TAPAS program, where we ask some people for 20% of their volunteer, 20% of their time to contribute to it's really microtasking. One of the things we've found helpful is we've done this very, very incrementally. So we actually have not built out a technology platform to manage it. In fact, if anybody has a good one, we'd love to hear about it if it's open source. But what we've done is just what Katria said, which is build the network first around specific kinds of tasks that we've asked people if they'd like to participate in. So you build the network first, and we built it really small. We sent it out to a very narrow group of like 200 people who were interested in innovation and were potentially willing to contribute some of their expertise. The way we are trying to grow it, which I think might have a corollary, we just on Tuesday sent out a message asking the people who were participating if they'd like to invite a friend. So let it build organically within the community from expert to expert. And then the other thing we did that was similar to what Alissa said that was really helpful is we've now been giving badges for those who've participated productively. They've come in, they've done a good job, they've been satisfied with the experience, and then they've come back for more. So encourage repetitive tasking through some kind of visible recognition system.
Yeah, so a reputation system, building up the
Yeah.
reputation.
Can I just jump in on, so we talked about reputation a little bit, and we not to sort of go too deep into Clay's point, but we were interested in more sort of civically rewarding mechanisms of recognition. And for example, could you get an automatic letter at the end of the year from the mayor that highlights contributions to the city? You know, are there ways that you could, again, use the tool to keep track of your contributions across many different departments, and you get this letter from the mayor that lists them all, and you can frame it and put it on the wall?
So, but Kathy, system only for federal, or does it?
Right now it's only for federal. I'd love to see it extended, and as I said, we're started very, very small to prove, you know, sort of as a little prototype, and if it seems to be working, we may expand it.
So I guess my question back to you is, what could this group do? You already said if you have a better open source platform, that would be great. Is there anything else that this group could do or could feed off of, conversely? Could this group feed off, how could it feed off of what you're doing at the federal level for more local engagement?
I think some of that is providing examples of where things that we're considering at the federal level are already being done at the local level. I think my sense is that there's a lot going on out there that we're just unaware of. So we've started communities of practice in different areas, one on challenges, one on mobile, one on social media. And it would be great if those could be extended outside of the federal community, and that's an idea I'm going to bring back, because that's a mechanism to get that input and involvement.
Okay. Story.
Also do another +1 to Katria's comment. I don't think you can underestimate the cultural shift and the significance of that requires
in order for this model to be successful, we have to look at government from being problem solvers to becoming facilitators of problems, which is a major change in sort of the way I think people think about their jobs and what the role of government is. And I think to that end, figuring out how we enable people inside government to come up with the right sort of scope and scale of the framing of the problem is really critical. We can't ask people, I don't think, to like solve poverty. I think coming up with discrete, we talked about more public-facing challenges as opposed to looking at internal government consulting is not the type of challenge I think that we want to engage citizens in, especially to build the network. But figuring out those examples, and I think that's where we need to understand what are the types of challenges, how do we frame those in a way that does engage this broader community.
So in the crowdsourcing solutions is done by specific companies who are expert at framing the question. You know, I think of Innocentive as an example. You go to them, they, refine your question so that it can then go out to a group of people who are already their network, who are problem solvers. And is there an organization, is there a function here that needs to be added in your model? I mean, it seems like it's more than a piece of software that I'm not trying to denigrate. I'm just saying, how are you thinking about that? Alissa.
We talked a bit about that, and one of the opportunities we saw with this software was to slowly shift the way government integrates community experts into their decision making. And so it was like not something that we would make explicit on the tool, that like we're going to change the way that you engage and make decisions, but that through hopefully asking some questions around what problem they needed to solve and probing a little bit, we could help frame that. So we were relying on training a bit, but then also some sort of design mechanisms that would help kind of drill into better framing problems.
Good.
But the understanding that it would be slow and that there would probably be some mismatches in the beginning and that there would need to be a shift over time to see large results.
So my question to the group next is, happens next to make this happen? Michelle?
5 people just said that we need to build the network and the practices before the software. Kathy has a network and the practice. Frank wants to build software. I'm seeing an opportunity for collaboration.
Okay.
And they're
good.
sitting next to each other.
But one of the things Kathy said that struck me as a little bit different than what we were talking about was micro tasks. And I
agree.
We didn't get down to that. I mean, we kind of talked about that was not what we wanted to do. But I guess we should explore more what you mean by micro task and what that might actually.
Yeah, I think there's a distinction. What we're doing is more specifically microtasking, where we need somebody to write captions for a video, or we want somebody to develop an API or a data set. I think what you're talking about is more co-creation, where ours is more microtasking. So I would encourage you to think a little bit more about the differences and what kinds of actual work you expect people to do, and think about how to characterize it. Because if they're contributing to the development of a policy or solution rather than just working on an existing thing, I think that's a little bit, I agree, it's a little different.
Okay, let's bring Greg and then Joel.
So I certainly like the spirit of this project, but this is a high-risk project. This is a project that has the risk of setting back open government years. Okay, so I want to emphasize that. So on the upside of it, this is certainly a case for a minimal viable product, right? What is exactly, how do you make? There are other people that are doing things that look like this. Kaggle and Top Coder, which are holding contests, Kaggle for data science, Top Coder for solving computer algorithms and things like that, which are viable businesses where you're bringing people who are potentially great expertise, but not necessarily in your domain field, right? But they and they are bringing in new ideas and techniques for solving problems. It's very different than saying, hey, I'm going to just create an open network where anyone can come and make suggestions. One of the problems we have with open government is there are a lot of people who are labeled as technologists who aren't great technologists and who are barely technologists. And the community and people around them assume because they're working with computers that they are technologies, and people are put in terribly awkward situations. We have, within government, at least at the federal level, there's things like FACAs, and there are things, and there's the Administrative Procedure Act, because if you think about how easy this is to game, the whole point of ex parte information is, was there an informal conversation that took place around something that government was doing that's not part of the public record? So there's, and I say that this is a big risk because if people from the community are invited in to give advice and government does not take their advice, they will be turned off from participating the next time, right? If people take their advice, but it came from the two people who happen to be identified in that expert community, but they weren't really experts, then the government is going to be turned off from working with that community, from working with that tool or that community again. So there's very, and I think that we're talking about it at a very high level. Clearly, if you look at Kaggle, if you look at Topcoder, if you look at the Philadelphia, the Citizen Planning Institute, so they're clearly very highly targeted, subject domain, crafted solutions that are doing this type of thing. So there's the intent has value and there's purpose there, but it's tread lightly. I also wanted to just bring up, ThinkUp was a project, came out of the collaboration with the MacArthur Foundation and AAAS, where they were trying to bring more expertise into federal government advice. And ThinkUp was the product that grew out of that. And Anil Dash was doing that, and it's kind of significantly evolved, but it was not as easy. The government is very formal for a reason, right? And we use informal channel, but sometimes we use those informal channels extremely informally, right? And you don't necessarily want those informal channels to be publicly known about, because that creates another layer of issues and things like that. So I just wanted to.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
Joel, response?
Somewhat related. So I think, you made an interesting distinction, Greg, between experience and expertise, and that's, it's important to try to establish that if you're going to call on people. I've been working on a project with the City of Boston and the Engagement Game Lab at Emerson College that it's called Street Cred, and it's basically a civic reputation API layer for all of the civic engagement tools that are emerging. So to Alyssa's point about asks, like we have kind of a broad array of asks to citizens in the form of tools like text as in, the 311 reporting apps. And I think that's an interesting place to start to think about civic reputation, like how are these people engaging with government through these existing channels? And maybe from there build to other asks once you establish, kind of what people are good at and areas of interest, but kind of a vetting process.
Okay.
And
So-
conceptually, just one thing to add conceptually, one thing that's really interesting to me about this concept is that in a way we're talking about representational government at an informal level. And so, what does that look like if these ambassadors or, civic representatives start to take on a quasi-formal role?
Okay.
I just want to echo, I think it's interesting to think about lowering the vetting process for participation is another way of thinking at it. Because right now, our vetting process of who can participate is very expensive and time consuming. And if we had a way of lowering that barrier so you still vetted people, but you could vet more people more broadly, that's an interesting way to think about it.
Okay, we're going to hear from Keisha, and then we'll wrap up with you and sort of particularly sort of next steps. I love it that you've got this place on the web where people can contribute. I assume that that's where people can contribute, but let's hear it from Keisha, and then.
I want to start with an apology for putting us on a hamster wheel. I threw out problems without suggesting start addressing them. To Charlie's question, what happens next? You've got a solution, but you have not yet shown me a small problem that you can apply it to. And I think find an issue in 2 communities that has government and community members interested in it, and see how it works. Participate in something in your own community when you go home that could be or could not be solved by the solution that you're talking about. I think that's step 1. I will definitely keep an eye on this, and I can try and plug you into communities we know as if that's interesting at all.
Excellent. Frank?
I'm going to try and reverse the hamster wheel, not to be a sort of crazy techno optimist, and this is very unnatural to be arguing against the idea of building this offline with people and then working out the technology. I think there's something interesting here about like the limits of tools in government process. That, you know, why can you get a MailChimp account and start to send really professional emails individually within government when we are sort of collectively saying, well, no, this is something that we really have to start with the offline piece, and we have to really carefully build the offline piece and then work out how the technology helps. And I'm curious if there's a way that a well-built tool starting with a real problem, starting with a small, a vertical probably, but if there's a way that the tool can seed in a lot of places, maybe in a lot of parks departments where they're thinking about trails, and then the network emerges. So we're talking about this as a network because that's ultimately what we want to see. But I'm curious if there's a model that this very easy on-ramp of the technology can help to bring the network in as it goes. And I know that sounds...
Disaster response. No one is going to say no to tools at a time when they need them.
Great, and she's recovers.org and knows the communities. I mean, there's a real interesting entree. Also, Kathy, I think you two should definitely talk at the break. And Waldo, last comment on this area, and we're going to move on.
I just want to mention this because I haven't heard it mentioned. This is a thing. It's been a thing for a long time in municipalities throughout the country. I've been on easily 24 of these committees. So, like when the playground was old and run down in downtown Charlottesville, a committee was established, and the experts, the kids who took their kids to the playground all the time, and a couple of them happened to be architects because they were. And so the city said, hey, join the committee. And they got together a half dozen times, and they came up with a new plan for the playground, and then the city staff built a playground. Everybody was happy. I was on another one that was about where to put the new courthouse. There were 2 candidates. And so they had some regular citizens like me, but then they also had some attorneys and a couple of former judges and so on. We met a few times, and they picked the one that most of us preferred that they wouldn't have picked. And we were a little annoyed, but whatever. Life went on, and there were more committees to be on. There must be tens or hundreds of thousands of these committees all over the country right now on a municipal level. Government hasn't come crumbling down, and people haven't revolted with pitchforks when the decisions don't go the right way, and I don't think people are demanding compensation, and it seems to be going all right.
Okay, great. Final note. Reminder to everybody here and online that bit.ly.focuspin, great pun title, would be great. Please be involved. Okay, the next group is the intrapreneurship, or however we want to, whatever your new name is. And who's reporting for that? Harper Reed. Okay.
I'm going to go ahead and start, but then I'll be calling in Andrea and Greg probably pretty quickly. Bracken, do we have a presentation?
Okay. I'll give it to Charlie when you start.
Okay.
Can I just plug in
But it would be better if I could keep it.
Okay.
So, if you don't mind. The clicker's here.
I'll go get it to stall.
Okay. Here's the clicker. It's like the cudgel. Aspen Innovation.
Okay, so clear I've stolen this presentation from John Bracken, who I think made it for something before, but as a good intro, as a good intro piece, this kind of helps frame what we were talking about. So you guys are familiar, I hope, with this movie, Hudsucker Proxy. Great movie, but it really is a good example of how innovation inside of an organization is really hard and honestly often sucks. So the next slide here, which I barely know anything about because it's calling to John's memories, is a lot about Michael Mannis and his idea of headwinds and antibodies and how these are the things that the internal change agents confront. And then we all know what happens with this guy here. So I'm missing a slide here, John. Anyway, so Ned Stark right here, things didn't really work out for him. But the thing about Ned Stark is he's trying to do the right thing. And so this is just going, man. Are we on Ignite time here? What is this? I'm just gonna put the clicker down. This is literally your Ignite presentation, huh, John?
No, this is adapted. This is a slide from Brett.
Okay, well, this is a slide from Brett. Usually the presentation doesn't advance every 5 seconds or whatever it is on its own, and usually I get to actually talk rather than run. So anyway, the idea here is you have all these problems with innovating inside of these organizations. We've all seen these problems. Greg has a lot to say about this, Andrea has a lot to say about this, and one of the things that we wanted to figure out how to do is how do we create an organization, a set of tools, etc., that will help facilitate these people to be this Kool-Aid man that breaks through the walls, that's able to actually support and actually innovate internally, not get their heads cut off in the greatest spoiler in all of the world, and not, die or whatever happens in the Hudsucker Proxy. Andrea?
Okay. So.
I'm really glad that I could help out everyone.
Okay, so I'm going to try to reframe everything I'm going to talk about as the Kool-Aid. So the Kool-Aid is good in this case, and the Kool-Aid is what's going to help people who are in leadership positions. So this idea would target folks who are managers in a government organization who have already proven that they have some capacity to withstand the headwinds, to swat away the antibodies to get things done. But we want to make those people, give those people tools to be even more likely to be the kind of change agents that they want to be and that we really need them to be inside government so that they can make connections, build relationships with folks outside government who are trying to bring new ideas to how government works and how services are provided. So the who that we would target would be folks, I think that we can make the slide stop now because they're just going to be really distracting. Folks inside government who are already in senior roles, the way that we would make it possible for them to participate in this cohort sort of peer network learning community is by making this innovation fellowship, for lack of a more creative term, really prestigious, so that their city agency heads and their city mayors would want their city, their agency to be branded as an innovative agency. And the way that you sort of further your brand as an innovative organization is that you have one of your senior managers participating in this cohort.
these folks would apply, so they would have to be folks who are willing, who raise their hand and say, I want to spend time developing my skills in innovation and in making change within government. And then there would need to be some sort of process by which we know that the folks that they report to are also bought into the fact that they would be spending some time away from the office, learning, et cetera, and bring those people they report to into the conversation as well. So you're not only helping develop the individual, but you're helping develop their ability to make things happen within their organization and within their group. Then there would be some sort of curriculum designed to focus less on leadership, but more on design and other tools and approaches that help people develop solutions. It would be not so much focused on technology, but more focused on innovation. And it would not necessarily be the kind of thing where, like a Code for America, where you're focused on a project, right? It would be about system change. So you continue to do your job that you already have. You now do so with the benefit of thought partners who are in other similar organizations across the country and experts who help expose you to the way that people are already making really exciting things happen within government. So we envisioned it would be, 3 or 4 days every time folks get together, every quarter or so. It would be in different cities so people could be exposed to different agencies that operate differently. And we explored a few other ideas like a job shadow kind of thing for a week or exchanges. Greg, do you want to add?
So I'd like to locate this with the other similar type of programs that are happening, and how is it the same and how is it different? What makes it special and worth pursuing? So there are many ways for individual professional development, right? So as a mid in my career, a person might choose, hey, I want to go get an MBA, I want to get an MBA, or I want to do another program. And I know of a couple programs within federal government that are particularly targeted to the federal employee that's looking at doing a career and becoming an SES, an executive. And Harvard offers a program. I'm not sure if it's UVA or a couple of others. And these can be 3-week, 6-week programs, very focused on individual development, costs tens of thousands of dollars to do. Sometimes they're supported and paid for by a government agency. But it's very much focused on the individual if you're in mid-career. What we're seeing, we started with the question of, is there something we could do to invert the Code for America model? And I think the Code for America model is an accelerator model, it's a fellowship model, and one of the things it has is that cohort aspect. And Harper made a comment about enabling cohorts. We're starting to see a pattern of accelerating innovation and change, design patterns that are appearing, which have to do with having a cohort work together, having to do with accelerator models, having to do with training, et cetera, et cetera. So whether you're looking at that as a accelerator or fellowship, we're seeing this pattern. And I think we asked the question, how would we apply it to individuals that were in government? Right? And we debated a little bit about, do you apply it to just kind of anybody in government? And we came down on the side of, you want it to someone, as Andrea was saying, who is already making progress against the headwinds, who already has some track record of success, but they could be enabled to be better and be better within their specific organization. I think one of the things it could do is to pull together resources that looked at that person in their field within their organizational reality and help them navigate that reality better. So Code for America as a way of developing young talent coming into the pipeline, bringing in new people. This is an aspect of developing pipeline, part of a pipeline that was developing talent mid-career and going on. And the fantasy of success of being able to find people who then 10 or 20 years later were part of the same cohort, but were also much higher up in positions of authority and to affect change.
Okay. So one that Andrea kept bringing up was this idea of who these people are and where in the organization they are. And one kind of set of words we came to say over and over again was executive visibility. Who are the people who can appeal up to the executives, but also have a lot of power going, a lot of responsibility and a lot of probably forward motion up into the organizations as well. And so I think that was something that's really important. And touching on the design patterns, oftentimes, we did this at the campaign quite a bit, where we decided we wanted to build some design patterns that we could give to people who are either doing technology or user experience like we were doing, so they could build and replicate the same thing we were doing. Oftentimes this had nothing to do with technology and mostly had to do with just rule sets that allowed us to be successful. And so what are the design patterns for having successful innovation inside of a bureaucracy? I think we could probably all raise our hands and say, well, this has been successful for me. But how do we create an organization that documents this, and then the next time we have a class or whatever, documents and iterates upon that to allow us to always have somewhat of an up-to-date wiki or whatever on rules for innovating inside of a bureaucracy.
Right,
These things could be as simple as defining an executive sponsor for a project. That could be rule number 1. Rule number 2 could be anything. I mean, the idea here is we don't know what will be successful in rural government versus city government, but there's going to be commonalities between those things that we can help share and help foster.
So we did end up getting to the point this was a specific instance of creating a program that was designed around enabling cohorts, where you have the set of design patterns we're seeing work in other places, include executive buy-in, including that you apply to it, et cetera, et cetera. And we think that there's a secondary potential that, one, we do it for this instance, but at the same time for the Aspen Institute and for the Knight Foundation to think about, well, how do you scale this out at a much larger level? Because if these patterns are being really successful, how do we actually create this type, how do we institutionalize this type of change so that other people can create cohort programs and that
Right.
they scale more broadly?
And so with that, which is, I think that's incredibly important, because the biggest thing that came out of this is a long view product. This isn't something that in 1 year results. The idea here is, how do we create and foster a community today that will help us in 10 years, in 20 years, who will be the leaders in 10 years and 15 years, not something that will help tomorrow. And hopefully the design patterns that come out of this, hopefully the best practices about building a cohort network inside of Gov is something that we can start using and distributing around, but I don't think this is something that is going to have results immediately.
Alissa?
So I've thought a lot about how to increase innovation capacity within government, but mostly at the municipal level. And one of the things that you said that struck me as maybe problematic was bringing individuals, and I'm just going to assume it was like one person representing a locality, to form this cohort. And so as you were describing that, I was thinking, well, like, don't we have a lot of innovation offices that are like one person is really in charge there? And are we seeing this cohort and this collaboration, like you described, happen organically from the innovation offices that are spurring up throughout the country? And I would say no. And so I guess the challenge, or I would say maybe include multiple people from one municipality, so that when you go back to your government, you actually have peers. In my experience working in San Francisco, nobody wanted to work with Jay and I. And it was really difficult. And had we had people in the health department and other departments that kind of spoke the same language as us, it would have been much easier. So I would encourage you to think about multiple people from one municipality as participating in this. And then I think to the sustainability point, maybe thinking about the train the trainer. And so it's mostly about increasing innovation capacity and less about innovative products as a result of the training, right? And so if I could come back to Pawnee with really amazing experience with 5 of my peers and ensure that I practice those management principles or innovation principles, whatever you want to call it, and so now I'm allowing staff to emerge that otherwise wouldn't emerge. And then I think to the point of like the wiki, creating it openly is one way to ensure I guess, build in sustainability to a certain degree and openness, so that other people's programs can plug in programs that we might not currently be aware of.
Okay, Clay Johnson.
So I think this is an interesting and good idea. I kind of think that, for me, I just sort of want to call a spade, and that what we're really, the problem area I see is that the training organizations for government suck. It's really bad. The career development stuff for government employees are bad. So like the Office of, and they're underfunded, and except for, it turns out, contracting officers. The contracting officer workforce has an incredible set of nonprofits or affiliated organizations. Defense Acquisition University, that sounds like a great place to go to college.
God, it's not.
And the Federal Acquisition Institute. But what's interesting about these organizations is their whole job is to offer training programs to contracting officers. And contracting officers, if they want to get promoted and succeed inside of federal government, must continue their continuing education through these organizations. OPM, the Office of Personnel Management, also offers training courses for the federal government. They offer one on for federal government employees. They offer, but their offerings are, here's how to use Twitter, and here's how to use Facebook, and that's it. And so, like, I think like having intrapreneurship and that kind of thing is like cool inside of government, but like the people who want to succeed and innovate are innovating and succeeding at that innovation. What we have to do is we have to like move the other, 4.5 million government employees along in the space, and the only way that we're going to be able to do that is by offering courses and sort of line items on resumes.
Okay, Harper, quickly, and then Michelle.
So I think that's great. I just think aggressively different than what we're talking about here. And I think training is really important, and I don't want to discount that, but I would like to continue the conversation on cohorts.
I just wanted to clarify that when we talk about innovation, we're not talking about ideas. Ideas are cheap. They're a dime a dozen. What we really want to enable and accelerate is the ability to get shit done, and to learn from people who have been able to. So OPM needs to change their training. Who in OPM is going to do that? I hope it's going to be one of these fellows in 5 years. They can come back and draw on their network and resources to make those more systemic changes happen. But these are the change agents.
So as we kind of wrap up on this, what are the next steps to move this forward? You've got some group. Okay, well, let's get the other two comments. Then I'd like to come back and get an answer. But I want to see what the next steps are. Brett, and then Andrew, and then we'll go back to Harper.
So I was a member of the group, and 2 points I think require clarification on. Many of us have, and I think you were going there, have our definition of innovation, new sexy app. That isn't what the group really means. It means, well, we're not focusing on technology, we're focusing on big change. So let's sort of be careful there. Who the target is. We are not targeting the 2-year political appointee. We are targeting the 20-year employee who's in for the long haul. I don't think we need to worry about the political appointee. They're in there for a reason. They're in there to change things, hopefully. But instead, the people who I would argue do the real work of government, and sort of the sub-distinction there as we talk about these programs, and my initial concern was we hear about peer networks and graduate degrees and all of that blah, blah, blah. And what do you get? You get a certificate, or you get a pretty picture. I think I see, and I hope the others see this, as a very applied group, where you're not wearing a tie, you're sitting around, and you're saying, how do you get stuff done in here? And then you share your workaround lessons. You say, oh yeah, you call Billy Bob, and he can get things done. A very sort of grassroots, going to Harper's sort of rules engine. These are ways of doing it. So I think those subtleties are pretty important.
Good.
I've been tremendously excited by the last few minutes and this idea of design patterns and cohorts, because I think we've managed to get away from, there's a technological solution to everything, to try and thinking about what the social and political and cultural factors there are. It's incredibly important that it's not just a book of patterns, because I have seen those taken by all sorts of bureaucratic organizations, and they go through the motions and they have people with the appropriate job titles and nothing happens. So it's people knowing how to apply that and being mentored to apply that and actually applying it again and again and again. So I wouldn't see this as something in which every public servant gets trained in this. Actually, you need a much smaller number of people who know how to get this done in organizations and do it again and again and build on that experience. And I was reminded when I went to work for a man called Sir Derek Rayner, who was Margaret Thatcher's advisor on government efficiency. He said, you know, I've recruited you because I think you're bright, and you'll think you'll know how to change these organizations and how to make them better. You won't know at all. Your job is to find the people who know how to make the change, link them to the skills they haven't got, and give them a voice, and and protect them as well, and get those ideas to the executives of those organizations and establish real programs for change. So I think this is a great idea, and we need to think how we make it concrete and how we progress it. We won't change everything in a day. It will take more than a year to change all the DMV offices in the US. But it's this sort of thing where you build on it, you gain the knowledge, you feed that back, you build a cadre of people who know how to do this.
So,
is the way to get things done.
So just how would you go about it in the UK?
I'd identify some people who are leading change within the organizations. I'd distill out some stuff from them. I'd couple them with some others from outside, particularly, actually this is an area where technologists can help because their internal IT will be pretty useless. And I'd move them about a bit and get them to train teams. You know, it's the Jesus Christ model. They each have to train 12, and then those go off and train 12 more. And you build it out like that.
So, Alissa, you want to comment after Harper or before Harper, just so I can get a... Okay.
I just have one brief, if you're going to speak to this, you should speak to this.
Well, what I wanted to do is I actually wanted to ask Andrea to share a little bit of her experience with a similar cohort group that then led to her making different decisions in her current position. And because I think that is really some of the inspiration that we had, is that we're not inventing anything.
Yeah.
This is something that's already happening. We just need to bring the open the government technology, government innovation world.
So but this is also a little bit of an inversion of what already exists in some other areas. So when I got into education, I went to the U.S. Department of Education as part of a cohort, a national cohort called the Broad Residency. And the idea is it's a 2-year commitment to be in a job in government, and through that 2 years, spend several days every quarter with about 40 others who are also learning how to make change. The commitment to change is at the core, and the commitment to, and this sort of optimism is at the core. And the thing that is taught is a combination of how government works for people who are outside of it. That may not be the need here because these are folks who are in it. The exposure here might be the inverse, how innovation, how new ideas get implemented in places with fewer constraints, and then how to begin together to think about creatively removing the constraints that are within government. So that was definitely the inspiration. We know that we have other designs and patterns that we can lift from as we build something like this. We wouldn't be reinventing any wheels, but we know that what's really, really powerful is cohort, focused on a similar sort of set of goals, and then a mentor network that can show them how it's done. So in real life learning, I did it this way in this situation.
So I didn't get the name of your education network. Was it Broad?
Broad. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I assume the Broad Foundation put a lot of money into it.
Yes, they do.
So
it is not a low-cost endeavor.
This is a significant endeavor which takes some institution to take leadership, organize, and fund. And not necessarily the same institution, but those are functions that need to be done. And my question back to you is, have you addressed who would be the likely, how do you take this to the next step other than writing it up?
Well, I mean, Andrew basically defined kind of the plan that we had, which was find dollars, find people to start designing that kind of those design patterns and talking kind of about their experiences. That will do two things. One, it will set our curriculum, and two, it will kind of give us that wiki, the start of that wiki. But I think the first thing is exactly what you said. Who is the organization that leads it?
Yeah.
Who's the organization that leads the funding of it?
Yeah.
Things need to be identified, and Knight
I think you
Foundation,
could
John.
get I think it could be done with some type of pilot grant.
Yes.
Which, right, so there's an R&D where you're gathering the information, you're looking at the other existing programs that are already out there that might be applicable, you're distilling some of the design patterns, and you're saying, okay, we think it might look like this, and you're imagining what type of tests or other things to be done as you head towards a larger, more significant investment.
I guess I'm even going down a level, which is are there people here who actually would want to write a letter of inquiry for a design grant?
Well, honestly, I think everyone here has a little bit of piece of this, because I know that talking to Brett about his experiences with the police department and as CIO of Chicago gives us probably 4,000 or 5,000 pages of stuff. Talking to Andrea, Greg, etc. Everyone here has our examples of how to do this. So I do think there's a lot of people here who could contribute. But to your point, who is the leader? Who is a person that's in charge? And I got to go.
Yeah, that's why I think somebody needs to take the initiative. John Bracken.
Well, I was just going to propose one possible sort of outcome or metric of success around this might be that rather than that we see a trend of that flipped the government looking to recruit people to come into government to do 2-year tours of duty. But if we see industry, if we see startups going and having identified pool of recognized innovators from within government and say, oh my God, I want to go recruit that person who's been doing this amazing work in government and bring them into the for-profit world.
So I think if there was a step that we wanted to take there, I think to some extent it might be going back to Nick Sinai or going to some other people and creating this little zone of some freedom, right? Where there's top buy-in from the presidential branch that we're going to allow a little bit of interaction that might otherwise be seen as cronyism, right? So that some individuals who are inside can actually engage with some activities with people that are outside.
Yeah, my guess is that's not the biggest. That's not going to be a big problem. I may be wrong about that.
It may not. Great, if that's not a big problem, so for example, in my situation, right, because the Knight Foundation was doing a project on open government, I got clearance from the FCC lawyers to participate in the news challenge. But it's under the current model, it's very difficult for me to continue to explore that and continue to be in government unless there was incredibly high-level clearance that established the rules where I would not get in trouble or get other people in trouble in order to do that participation.
Okay. Kathy, maybe you can
We're having a very high-level conversation led by the White House on cross-sector leadership and the need for this kind of cross-sector collaboration. So I think there is a lot of appetite for that. One of the things I might suggest is looking at the Partnership for Public Service, which does run a lot of very, very high-quality programs. And yes, they can be expensive, but they include many of the components of the things that have been discussed: a cohort, geographical diversity. What I think they may lack is, and I'm not sure of this, but I think one of the real benefits not just multi-sector, but cross-government, having municipal, state, and federal people mixed together. I wouldn't necessarily have a federal one, a state one, and a municipal one, because I think there's things we can all learn from each other.
Yeah.
But might be worth talking to partnership, and I can help with that if that's needed.
Great. Just to know, they just couldn't make it here. But I think the involvement of all levels of government in this program would be a real asset, it seems. Okay, Alissa Black and then Susan, and we'll wrap it up.
I just wanted to point out, and I think you just got to this point, Kathy, around creating a loose network of outsiders to support this cohort so that there's and I keep thinking about municipal level, but when I go back to my city, I have an understanding of maybe there are community foundations that I've never thought of for support, or design firms that might be interested in doing some pro bono work that I can now tap or ask for resources for. So kind of creating that loose network that supports the cohorts when they get back to their communities.
Okay. Susan?
I'm really excited by this discussion, and although I don't want to necessarily commit my federal dollars to do this at this point in time, I'm very interested in exploring it, possibly in the vertical of the library world, because I think for us to continue to be relevant in the future, we have challenges with our innovative leaders and some of our less innovative folks. So I'm very excited and encouraged by it. I know that I'm returning to Aspen in a few weeks to a Gates-funded convening on the future of libraries. And I think this kind of activity is something that could really come out of that convening, and I'll make sure we have some discussion about that. But I think the Gates Foundation might be willing to fund this kind of thing in a particular vertical, and I'll try to make sure we have those conversations.
Okay, excellent. John Bracken, use your card. Okay. So I think we've explored this one, pretty thoroughly to the extent we can in the morning, and just encourage that group to continue. I'm expecting all these groups to continue. Panthea Lee will be writing up a report. I'm hoping you will help her in terms of how the nuances, and that will further help you in moving forward. Harper?
I just back-channeled to John Bracken, and he said he would lead it.
Oh.
I'm just kidding. Actually, what he actually said is that he said that I will help chase this just to make sure that we don't and make sure that we connect to all the people. And then John Bracken did say that to what extent they can, they would love to help out. So this is something that I hope we can take forward.
Is
there one more group?
There is, and but I thought we could